The more you rely on AI to generate code, especially in clinical programming, the more you're pushing the bottleneck to the validation. So whether you use software to do that or a human, I think you have to be cognizant of the scope changes. And the question whether or not we will be replaced is an age-old one. I would sort of remind ourselves that it's the nature of computer science, it's the nature of human progress, this age-old question. And rather than think of it as replacing ourselves, we should think of ourselves of how do we leverage tools to move forward. There's a reason why we don't build self-driving cars in assembly code. There's a reason why we do it in higher level languages. And that's the nature of computer science. That's the beauty of software in general. You create abstraction layers. So in a way, LLMs and AI in general is just another abstraction layer. And so understanding what that means and then understanding how to use it for your tasks is something that we're particularly passionate about. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is the work that we're doing at Verisian. So I want to start just by setting the tone a little bit for what we're trying to do here. And ultimately, we all try to seek quality, speed, and confidence in our trials. And there's this very beautiful sort of, in general, in management and in building product and process that you have to choose 2 out of 3, quality, speed, and time. And usually you can just do 2 out of 3. And it's useful to think in those terms, but one of the things that we're passionate about is good code. And this is just not just a thing in general in clinical programming, in software in general. But the statistical programming industry for clinical trials is particularly interesting because at least I'm not aware of any other industry that basically just writes code twice, at least, in relation to double programming. And double programming is a testament of how important it is to write not just good code, but to write code that is validated and that actually does what we want it to do. But I should remind ourselves that good code generally in the software industry is written just by iteration. I look at open source, you just iterate on it. You do reviews of your code, you submit PRs, people look at your code, you iterate. You don't write it twice to people that independently write code. And that's something that I would sort of remind ourselves. I'm not trying to say that we should get rid of double programming because I don't know how many people try to say that. And it's important to work within the confines of the process, but I do sort of want to make that point because that's how software is built, and the world is built on largely effectively open source software, which is the greatest testament of constant iteration. Now, iteration, besides just double programming, in our industry really means traceability. And traceability here, I'm really referring to this understanding of the interaction between data and code. Because at its fundamental components, a study is just a bunch of data and a bunch of code that generates some outputs. And so what we're trying to introduce here is this notion of code traceability. We're all familiar with metadata traceability, but what we're really trying to get our head around and to introduce is this concept of code traceability. And what do we mean by code traceability? Code traceability is being able to trace content interactions between data, code, and results. And I want to show you first what that actually means in practice by just doing a quick demo. And I would sort of highlight that everything that I will show, oh, that's your YouTube channel, subscribe and like. So what I'm going to show now, just as a side note, is freely available. None of this is behind any paywall. Almost all of our work currently is freely available. You can either view a demo study that we've created with some dummy data. It's a fairly small study. Or you can also create your account and upload your own logs. And by logs, we mean SAS logs. Someone uploaded logs from some email server, which are still logs, but we can't do anything with that. So this is what we call is our tracer. And this is a data set level view of a study. Again, this is a sample study, so it's not a real study and it's fairly small. But you see all of the interactions and all the data sets that have been built effectively in this study. And what I can do is let's say I want to look at TFL level, and I can filter for a TLF. So I click on this TLF responder.sas, and I can see that this atom.adf, this is the proc step that generates this particular data set. I can see the exact code that was generated to do that, and a thing that I think is really, really cool that we do is that we resolve any macro code that generates that within your code base. So normally you would have a macro invocation if you're reading your code, and you would have to go into the macro and understand actually what was actually run as part of that analysis. And what we've spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, maybe not so much blood, but definitely sweat and tears, is resolving macro code. So if you're trying to understand or trace back for what actually happened in your code base, you can see in effectively one view that here there's one macro invocation, macro call that was executed in this way at data set level firstly. But let's say I want to understand where this comes from. I can trace this back. I see this is based, the dependencies basically down upstream of this particular data set. I can go up even further, this atom.adsl, I can go back and all the way down to source. I can get the full traceability at data set level in SAS for that particular TLF that we mentioned that I showed before, right here. And the really cool thing that we think is that let's say you want to get the exact derivation in code for that particular data set. I can go to this tab, and if I scroll the way up, this is the 800 lines of code where we create effectively what we call a virtual file of all of the code that's necessary to create that particular TLF. Now, I think that's already quite useful, but I don't think that impressive. The next step that we're building is variable level traceability, because data set is great, but I think variable is probably a little bit more interesting. So currently that's not in the demo, and so we're introducing very soon variable level traceability. And this is what we're really, really excited about, because what this means is that we go from data set to every single transformation at variable level to what actually happened in that variable. We can show you the actual lines of code for one particular variable. And in general, what we always say, I've worked in data infrastructure for a while now. When you're building software, and especially if you're trying to debug or just understand, 80 to 90% of your time is just spent trying to understand your code. If it's code that you just wrote, maybe it's a little bit faster. But if it's code that you even wrote 3 months ago, and especially if it's someone else's code, it's not easy to understand actually what was done, especially if the comments aren't great. So effectively, and what this means is that we go, and this is an actual example of this. This is a Fisher's exact test, where for one particular variable, we can basically, this 800 lines of code, we effectively reduce down to just a few lines of code to demonstrate all of the actual transformations that happen for this particular variable. So if we're trying to understand, firstly, what actually happens, you can do that very, very easily with a click of a button. And the way that will look in our dashboard is something like this. Now, one question I think you should be asking at this point to us is why should you care about code traceability? And to answer that question, we like to take a step back into what is actually a clinical trial. And I sort of alluded to earlier before, which is at its core, and I don't think this gets said enough, is that a clinical trial is just a bunch of code that analyzes data. Those two are very interlinked because the data is collected in a certain way. And then as the industry has progressed, as we've matured to be able to communicate what's being done in those analyses, we've created a bunch of documentation, a bunch of structure in the form of both standards and some mission documents. And that's been fantastic, and especially in terms of being able to communicate, not just to the regulators, but also internally with different stakeholders, from CRO to sponsors, and obviously within sponsors and different teams as well. But the content of the trial is ultimately still the analysis code and the data. So we argue vehemently that the source of truth of a study is the analysis code. If you think about it, that's what contains all of the decisions, exclusion, inclusion criteria, everything related to the actual decision that we're taking in the protocol. So what would take preference if you've defined something in your protocol, in your SAP, and it's wrongly implemented? Your outputs will not be based on the SAP, will be based on the analysis code. So obviously, that's an obvious thing to say, but it's something that we should be aware of, especially as we look into using AI or automation in general to generate code. So we like to say that what matters is really the content of the study, not just the structure. And that's not to be dismissive about standards or anything at all. It's really just to highlight some of the limitations of automation and just focusing on metadata automation. So like I said before, to build what we do here, this is all based on logs. At present, we don't touch any data. We try to do that to make it easier to effectively get to that validation piece. And we do need the logs to be executed using a couple of flags like mprint, just so that you've got the resolved macro code in there. But we can talk about that later. So how does this help with speed, quality, and confidence? Now, firstly, we think a lot. There's a lot of use cases that we think we can build. And they span all the way from programming studies to validating studies to submitting studies. But right now, we're just focusing on a couple, and specifically 3 that I want to talk about today. And one is validation of spec. So, and this is important in relation to the AI piece, how do you ensure that whatever code you've written, or someone else has written, if you're a lead or if you're using AI, does it actually conform to what it's supposed to do? The second is just general code review, log validation, which Sanjeeva spoke about as well. And the last one, which I think is really, really cool, is results validation at TLF level. Now, we haven't released this yet, but I do want to speak a little bit about how this is going to look like. And the first is the spec validation. So basically what we will do is we'll give a confidence score at a couple of levels of resolution. The first is obviously study level resolution. And especially if you're a lead and you get, or even a sponsor, you get something from a CRO, we'll give you a view about what are all the specs that in our view are fine, need review, or just simply don't match with the spec that has been written. And so to zoom in a little bit, what this effectively will show is per variable, we'll be able to give a confidence score for does this actually conform to that particular spec. And yes, we do rely on LLMs here, and I'll come back in a second how we do that, because we do think we've got the right balance of using a deterministic approach, which is what the log analytics, by the way, is about. That's fully deterministic, the parsing and everything. And on the other hand, using LLMs to actually understand, quote unquote, the natural language in which the specs are usually written in. The code and log validation, this is just issue resolution. If you've ever worked with GitHub, and if you're familiar with that style of code review, we're sort of trying to introduce that idea into iterating on your code basis. So there'll be a validation tool that actually Vishwanath will do a short tutorial on that during lunch if you're interested. And the results validation, which probably maybe again depends on your interest, but it's also really, really cool. What we'll be able to do is that given a specific TLF, we'll firstly give you all of the variables that you need, both from source to SDTM to Atom. And we'll be able to highlight which ones may have some issues with data. This would require us to read into your data. It would just have read access, basically, obviously. And then we'd be able to say, okay, so let's say you drill down into this SDTM variable, we'd be able to tell you that, well, given your assumptions of how the distribution for that particular test should be, well, there's an outlier here that may indicate some issue in your data. So that's some of the ideas that we have in terms of the validation piece. Now, what we're also building is infrastructure to deploy LLMs. I would note at the start here, we're not using any of the, let's call them POP AI, as in the OpenAI, Claude AI. What we're doing is deploying our own LLMs here, open source, in order to make sure that it all conforms to privacy and security, and every organization would have their own, effectively fine-tuned to their studies. So I want to finish up by telling you a little bit about our approach to AI in light of obviously the topic of today. And the way we approach AI is that we call it traceability enabled and evidence-based AI. It's a bit of a mouthful, so maybe there's some marketing people that can make it shorter, but this is effectively the most accurate way of how we want to describe it. So why is this important? So first, a couple of things on what are LLMs, and we've spoken about this, well, debated this quite a bit already, but LLMs are really just, in some views, really good autocompletes. Depending on the context, they're excellent, they're just out of this world. But you have to be careful, is that given the wrong context, they will hallucinate. That's the nature of the LLM. So one obvious question that a lot of people then say, can you gain confidence by fine-tuning a study? Now, without getting into the specific, that's fairly difficult, especially because you're still dealing with a non-deterministic system. You're dealing with a probabilistic system, and you have to be aware of that. And so how could we gain confidence in AI? And this sort of goes a little bit into Sanjeeva's territory, but and this is the manual review, or, which is what we're trying to give to the community, is a way to do traceability-powered AI, which is both reproducible and evidence-based. And I'll explain to you how it works by giving you a little bit of an overview, opening up the bonnet, how the architecture works. So this is an example of how it would work in a sort of conversational agent-style way. So let's say you have a user question. So what we do is firstly we pass that user question to an LLM. From that LLM, we retrieve a bunch of clinical concepts. With those clinical concepts, we're then able to retrieve the traceability information for, let's say, that particular derivation. And again, this is from a database. This is the actual derivation that we retrieve. This is fully deterministic. So we now know in a fully deterministic way what actually, for that particular variable, with variable traceability, what happened for that particular, let's say, treatment emergent time frame. Then all of that, we then pass into another LLM. And the output that we give is a couple of things. So first is a natural language explanation, for example, of that derivation, which you can either use in your define-xml for the atom derivation summary or anywhere else. But crucially, we also add the evidence for it. So, and this comes from this part here. So we give the clinical concepts that relate to here and the traceability information. There'll be a button basically that shows you, show me the graph, the full dependency graph for that particular output. And so this way, we try to provide the evidence for you to then be able to review the outputs that you get from the AI. And so the results that you're deterministic, you're evidence-based and specific and study specific, so that ultimately you can have more confidence in output and ultimately more confidence in your review. And again, this is trying to work with both the limitations and the benefits of just an LLM in general. And this is our current approach to it. So to wrap things up a little bit, our goal is ultimately to enable for approval decisions of new therapies to be made when the science is done and to enter the market with confidence to protect the public. And some of the stuff that I showed you before that in this presentation is just a little bit of the stuff that we're working on right now. But ultimately, like I said before, we've got a bunch of stuff that we want to do. These are the 3 use cases that I shared with you today. But there's a lot more that we want to build, not just on the validation side, but especially on the building and the submitting side, from helping you build better define-xmls to reuse of code as well. One of the things we like to say a lot is that if you think about a clinical trial, or just generally statistical programming, it's effectively just a bunch of ETL pipelines. You take data from some sources, you transform it and you put it into some TFL. And then obviously more happens, but effectively from a programming perspective, that's what a clinical trial is. The way currently the world builds studies is more effectively as custom development projects, where you sort of start, you copy-paste code from different studies, you've got massive macro libraries, you use those macros, and that's great. I don't want to criticize at all, but I do want to at least think about different ways of how we could think about improving, not necessarily the speed, but really the quality of the code that we write. Of course, speed is sort of the result because quality takes time, but I hope you get my point. So how to get started? As I said before, we're trying to really find partners to help us build this. And almost everything that I showed today, except for the slides, is freely available. So there is a free trial that Vishwana is going to see. And we'd love to get your feedback, and especially your criticism, which, judging from the debate from Sanjeeva, there will be a lot. So I do look forward to that. We do have a Discord server as well. So if you don't get to speak to us today, do join the server, and feel free to ask any questions or feedback or anything that you think might be of value to us. As a final note, we've got 2 webinars that are coming up, like I said before. And I also would like to invite James to the stage, who's a little bit of an impromptu guest to our event. But I wanted to ask him, because he's been working a lot with our software to do code reviews, but also to share a little bit about what you do with your company.
Thanks, Tomás. Hey, everyone. Nice to see some faces I recognize. And Tomás, thanks for creating this community. I think we're going to do something very great here. I've been working with Tomás to help me. Let me tell you what I do. I created a company, a CRO, called EDA Clinical. If you're a statistician, EDA stands for Exploratory Data Analysis. It's the book by John Tukey, the first book on statistics. I'm a statistician myself. To get into the field, I had to learn SAS programming very quickly. I didn't have my master's yet, so to get in, I had to learn SAS programming, work very closely with the statisticians. And I started at a CRO myself. I worked in a FSP relationship within a CRO. I began leading studies, and then I got bored because, we're doing the same things over and over again. We're using the same macros. We have SOPs. And for me, in order to stand out, my work, I needed to make sure my work was high quality, very fast, and inspires confidence in my clients. So eventually I went on my own. I became an independent contractor. I sought the high profile contracts so the work is not boring. This is the stuff that's not built yet. This is the efficacy endpoints. This is the dashboards that the medical monitors need. This is so many different things that are not the typical SDTM, ADAM, and the TLF. So when I do that, I'm very competitive. I want to be the best programmer in the world. And to do that, I need to be very fast. I need to have no errors. I need, every time I deliver work, I want my clients to say, you know what, this is going to be right. I'm okay showing this to the FDA. I'm okay with submitting this. So one of the problems I had was I go very fast. When someone gives me something in development, I try to get it done as soon as possible. And the QC programmer loves to say, oh, I found your mistake. I found your mistake. Oh, you're not good enough. Look, I found another mistake. And I say, it's your job to find the little mistakes and tell me so that I can take care of it. Because I like to do the big chunk of work, the hard part, get it done, get it out to review, and then the QC reviewer gives me the last few things, update that variable label, increase the decimal precision there. But that's not the way the industry works. So that was difficult for me. So I had to slow down a little bit. The AI was not there yet to help me. So because of this attitude, just wanting to be the best, just wanting to do things quickly, high quality, inspire confidence, I started getting more contracts as an independent contractor. I can only handle 2 or 3 at a time. There's only so many hours in the week, 144 hours? I have to sleep at least 4 or 5. So eventually I had to grow my company and find other independent contractors, and I wanted to inspire the same level of excellence. And to do that is very difficult. So another trend in the industry was the move towards R and Python, and that's something I don't have either. So I'm bad at quality, I'm good at speed, and I'm bad at Python. I'm bad at R. Since I learned SAS first, I can't think in those terms. Everything is a spreadsheet for me. Everything's a row and a column. So I had to hire other people. I hired software engineers and I taught them SAS. SAS is very easy for software engineers. Now I have to make sure their speed is high, their quality is high, and their confidence is high because they represent my company. And we're trying to have the best programmers in the world. And I know I have a lot of competition here. I hear so much about the programmers here. But if I can't beat them, I'll have to join you. So that's why I'm here. So fortunately, the best way to get the quality up for my folks after they learn SAS, which is very easy for them, is the code review. Every time they submit code, I go line by line. I look at the input, the spec, their code, the output, and I have to go all the way back and forth to make sure that they thought about this correctly at each point, because when they submit this work on my behalf, I want them to have the quality, the speed, the confidence. So I've been doing this for a while, and I have my own clients. I also have to train them so that we can get more clients. So this is almost I'm doing 2 or 3 jobs again. So fortunately, I stumbled upon Tomás's work at Fuse, and it clicked. And I started using his demo week after week, and I used his code review and put all our logs in there, and we used that time and this visualization to talk through each step to understand, okay, this is the data flow. How did you go from here to here? What was your thinking? Why did you choose this loop instead of that loop? And it was a great way to understand the flow from a high level and dive down. In order to do that without this software, I have to open up so many pieces of documents, so many different documents to understand that flow. So this really helped take that code review process down from hours to minutes. So we would spend an hour at the end of each week with each of my programmers. Now I know in the software industry, they say they do the code review every single day. And to be the best, I think we should do the code review every single day. But does anyone do code review here? Nobody? No. Just 2? 3? Yeah, I was in the industry for 12 years, 13 years now, and I haven't seen code review once. No one has ever given me a code review. No one looked at my code, oh, you can do it better. So maybe because my code is perfect, but I've never got a code review. But the code review is very impactful for my new programmers because I get to tell them exactly how I would do something. And after I do that, I can record notes about it in the application. So that's one of the main reasons I've been using this week after week. And fortunately, working closely with Verisian, they've incorporated some of the comments that I've had, and it's just getting better and better every week. They iterate very quickly. So there's some other tools that I'm beginning to use more. It's issue resolution. So anytime we see an issue during this code review, it's easy to assign it and keep track of it. Because previously, keeping track of these things, depending what kind of issue it is, if it's an issue with the data, we put it in the DM issue log. If it's an issue with the TFLs, we put in the stat review log. If it's an issue with some of our own programmers, we put in the QC log. And there's another log you have? Data issue log, yeah. So, yeah, there's so many logs. And so this software is really making this review process very simple. And I hope you don't use it because it'll only give me more competition. But I'm afraid everyone's going to use it. And I think when we do use it, we won't have to do the boring things anymore, the things that we do over and over again. We can focus on the fun parts, the high-profile contracts. And I'm so happy to meet him. Otherwise, I told him that we would be doing this ourselves. We hired the software engineers not only because they can learn SAS better, but also because because they're software engineers, there's a concept called dog fooding, where when you're done eating your own food, you give the rest to the dog. So when we're done working for our clients, we want to build tools for ourselves. But through close partnership with Verisian, we're even faster. We don't have to do two things at once. Our speed is even better, our quality is better, and hopefully the confidence gets higher and higher. Yeah. So, thank you.